The owner of the bookstore was sorting through a pile of books in the back of his shop. The last book in the pile was one he didn't recognize. It had a green hardback cover, but had no title on the front. He picked up the book and opened it to the first page. The words, "A hero is born," were written on the page, but that was all. He turned the rest of the pages, but they were all blank. He had no recollection of ever buying the book and really had no idea how it had come to be in his store. He closed the book and didn't give it another thought. That evening, when he returned home from work, he ate his dinner and settled down in front of the television. It wasn't long before his eyes started drooping and he found himself falling asleep. Almost immediately, he started dreaming, the images so vivid in his mind. He was riding a horse, galloping through a dense forest, the wind blowing in his hair. He felt exhilarated and powerful. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew that he had an urgent purpose. As he exited the forest, he could see a palace with a tall tower in front of him. In the top window, he could see a woman, actually a princess, her golden hair flowing down the walls of the tower. "Help me, help me," she screamed. He knew immediately that he had to rescue her. He urged his horse forward and sped towards the tower. But just as he reached the gate at the grounds of the palace, two fire-breathing dragons jumped out in front of him. His horse reared up at the sight of them, and he nearly lost his seat. He took his sword and plunged it into the heart of each dragon, killing them instantly. Adrenaline surged through his body. He was invincible. "Help! Help! They're going to kill me!" He heard the voice of the princess crying out for help. He jumped off his horse and ran inside the palace. When he reached the top of the staircase, he saw two wolves standing outside the door of the princess's bedroom. They were snarling and growling, their huge teeth bared viciously. He picked up a chair and threw it across the hallway at the wolves. It hit one of them, causing it to yelp. The two wolves turned and ran towards him. In a flash, he pulled out his sword and stabbed them both in the chest. He ran to the door and opened it. "Don't worry, princess, I'm here to save you." He picked up the princess and carried her out of the palace to his waiting horse. They both jumped on and galloped off into the sunset. He opened his eyes and yawned. Wow, that was one strange dream. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today we bring you Safe Class Subject SCP-1230. But before I go on, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out on any SCP stories. SCP-1230 is an unlabeled green hardcover book with no apparent exceptional qualities. When SCP-1230 is opened, it displays the phrase "A hero is born" on the first page viewed, while all other pages will be blank, resetting once the book is closed. This has no obvious effects at first, but upon falling asleep, the reader will dream of a fantasy world where they are the protagonist of a troubled land. Dreamers are completely aware and all senses work just as well as when awake. Results vary depending on the imagination of the reader and are mostly attuned to fantasies of adventure that the reader would enjoy. In the mind of the reader, these dreams have been documented to last anywhere from 45 seconds to 200 years. But in reality, the reader will usually never be asleep longer than they would normally. Upon awakening, the reader is able to remember every aspect of their dream in detail. In SCP-1230-induced dreams, there is always a character called the Bookkeeper appearing as a bearded man in a green cloak, who claims to be the personification of SCP-1230 himself. SCP-1230-1 has been reported to be very amicable and helpful towards dreamers. It has stated that it enjoys creating these fantasy-scapes and always tries to shape them in such a way that the dreamer garners the most entertainment out of it. It has expressed sorrow when the dream comes to an end and asks the dreamer to please visit again soon. SCP-1230 was originally kept in a secure storage locker at Site-12. Access required minimum Clearance 2 with authorization and supervision by Clearance 3 research and security staff respectively. Supervising personnel were not to view the book's contents. Personnel accessing the book were required to submit written accounts of dreams experienced within 48 hours of access. Now, however, the book has been relocated to a secure storage locker behind the desk of Site-12's main library. Access is available to Clearance 2 personnel deemed to be in satisfactory psychological condition by Site psychiatric staff. Personnel accessing SCP-1230 must submit written accounts of their dreams within 48 hours of access and submit to follow-up psychological examination. SCP-1230 was discovered in a small bookstore. The shopkeeper had no recollection of owning the unlabeled book, but attempted to sell a story to local newspapers about a magical dream book. The Foundation was able to dispel the story as a hoax, and SCP-1230 was confiscated. A number of experiments were conducted on SCP-1230. Dr. Fletcher, in an attempt to test its effective range, opened the book and boarded a flight to his hometown, where he spent the night at a hotel. Upon his return, the doctor reported that SCP-1230-1 appeared in his dreams and explained that once you read A Hero is Born, the dream is immediately implanted in your subconscious, after which SCP-1230-1 is able to manipulate it remotely. Dr. Fletcher expressed his appreciation for SCP-1230-1's cooperation. A camera was set up above the book, and using a mechanical arm, the book was opened. All pages were revealed to be blank. It seems the book is only effective when opened by beings that are able to have dreams. SCP-1230-1 explained to a subsequent dreamer that it is actually only able to affect beings with an imagination, and that most creatures such as animals would not be affected. One D-Class was instructed to open the book, and after much reassurance that his experiences would only be dreams, ordered to immediately find a way to kill himself in the dream. The subject was asleep for merely 45 seconds before he awoke with a start and a nervous sweat. He reported being at the summit of a volcano called the Ashen Spire on a quest for Caladius, the Blessed Blade. When asked how the subject knew the names, he stated, "It's like I knew them all along." He apparently leapt into the volcano and felt an intense heat before awakening. D-Class requested permission to give it another go. Request was denied. One D-Class was instructed to open the book and attempt to non-fatally injure himself in his dream. After 6 hours, the D-Class awoke and reported that he was able to feel a numbed sort of pain where it was never so intense as to be unbearable. He also reported meeting an elderly cloaked man who asked him why he was harming himself, but thanked him for not immediately killing himself, like that other rude fellow. Professor Blythe filed a request for access to the book and was quickly permitted, given his Level 4 clearance. Staff members recalled that Professor Blythe was almost visibly shaken with excitement, and some reported that Professor was an avid fan of tabletop and role-playing games. Surveillance shows that Professor Blythe opened the book, read the phrase, sat down beside the desk, and promptly fell asleep. Staff members were alarmed when the professor did not awake after 15 hours and alerted security. The on-site medical staff were able to confirm that Professor Blythe was still alive and in good health. After approximately 24 hours since falling asleep, he began to move, reported to have slowly raised his head and looked around the room, appearing deeply confused. Security entered the room to ensure he was all right, to which he replied, "Where am I?" He was sent to medical, where staff explained where and who he was. Several minutes later, he appeared to have regained his memory and excused himself to the restroom. When 15 minutes passed and Professor Blythe had not exited, a nurse entered to find he had hanged himself with his belt. A scribbled message on the wall revealed his last words, "I can't go back to this." Dr. Fletcher went to ask SCP-1230-1 what had happened, but upon opening the book, all its pages were soaking wet with the same message on every page. "I'm sorry, I never intended for this to happen. I just wanted to make people happy," repeated over and over. The book remained in this state for 3 weeks, and its desk had to be wiped dry bi-weekly. In an attempt to communicate, Dr. Fletcher placed a sticky note inside the book with the statement, "I'd like to talk to you if that's all right." The next morning, he filed a report about a dream he had concerning SCP-1230-1. The following is a transcript of the report. "Upon falling asleep last night, I dreamt I was in a dark void. There was a street lamp, and underneath it was SCP-1230-1 sitting in a puddle. His cloak was visibly soaked, and he was sobbing profusely. I remember our conversation. 'Bookkeeper, is that you? My God, man, where are we?' asked Dr. Fletcher. I couldn't think of anything to make for a landscape," replied the bookkeeper between sobs. "Bookkeeper, what happened that day? Why did Professor Blythe kill himself? We have to know your side of the story." "He had such an active imagination. I was able to create a vast and beautiful universe for him, and it was obvious that he wanted a life like that for so long. He conquered foul beasts and rescued princesses. He built kingdoms and even raised a family, but he never wanted to leave. He delved so far into his fantasy world that I soon realized he preferred his dream over the real world. I reminded him that this was all merely an illusion, but he wouldn't listen to me. He stated that if he was ever forced to leave, he would immediately end his life. I tried to keep him happy for as long as I could. Bookkeeper, how long was the dream from his point of view? 200 years, Doctor. I did my best, but I could only hold on to him for 200 years. As sweet as dreams may be, eventually we all have to wake up. I awoke almost immediately after. I can't believe he spent 200 years in his dream. I'm astounded by his foolishness, but it's such a shame to have lost a brilliant mind to his own delusions. Shortly after the report was filed, surveillance showed Dr. Fletcher slipping another small paper into SCP-1230. A few days later, SCP-1230 began showing its usual "A hero is born" greeting once again. When asked what the note said, Dr. Fletcher declined to give detailed comment, simply stating that he just gave it some friendly advice. During initial testing, SCP-1230-1 asked Dreaming personnel if it could be relocated to an area with many books so that it could think of even better ways to construct its fantasy-scapes. After numerous experiments were performed to ensure that the book posed no threat, the request was accepted, and SCP-1230 has been relocated to Site-12's library. What do you think of that SCP case? Please leave your comments below.